So despite my experiences with elections that Maya so helpfully told you about, I'm going to prove to you tonight that even in the proposition's best, most fantastical inspired case where benevolent powers march against terrible despotic regimes, the very nature of an outside power taking violent action, fighting, for these ideals of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law is inherently dubious, shady, and questionable at best, or racist, supremacist, and morally bankrupt at its worst. Essentially, I will be arguing that no state has a right to impose itself and its desired political framework upon another, and that to do so violates the sovereignty and basic rights to freedom of to do so violates the basic rights to sovereignty and freedom of entire nations and peoples. Finally, I will be proving to you that even if it were acceptable to impose oneself in this way, we in the West are in no position to assume the role of the morally upright custodians of global peace and justice. So to fight a native force in order to install democracy in their state is supremely undemocratic. If we take democracy to mean a form of government where the people of a given society have a right to deliberate on legislation or decide upon governing officials to do so on their behalf, then any actions which seeks to impose something contrary to the will of these people must be considered undemocratic. Any subsequent authority that is instated as a result of this action thus immediately lacks legitimacy and has no mandate to rule, under the principles of democracy itself. It is not government by the people, nor for the people, rather it is government by some other, for some other. Unless a military invasion of a sovereign state has the goodwill to ask the local population for permission to blow their homes to smithereens, such an intervention has no mandate from the local population, no authority, and thus no right to intervene at all. In 2004, for instance, a year on from the invasion, 92% of Iraqis felt the coalition forces should leave. That doesn't sound like permission to me. But let's suppose for a moment that we forgive the proponents of undemocratic democracy for their poorly hidden hypocrisy, and Operation Get Rich of Oil, freedom is a go. Our would-be invader must now contend with the issue of cultural relativism. The proposition relies on the premise that democracy and individual liberty, as we imagine them, are inherently and universally effective and popular systems. But this is not true. These are Western ideas that have been born and cultivated in Western societies. Exporting these ideas is not a clean and straightforward process, nor is it often a popular one. To truly believe that fighting for democracy, individual liberty, and rule of law abroad is a noble and valiant pursuit, we must also accept that our way of life, our beliefs and ideas about society are inherently and intrinsically superior to those of others, those that we invade. To wage a war of democracy, the hypocrisy is in the name, we must accept that other cultures that do not align with our conceptions of law or justice are wrong, that they are inferior because they live in a way that isn't up to scratch with our ideas. If you're prepared to accept these things, then by all means walk through, not right now. If you're prepared to accept these things, then by all means walk out through that door labeled eyes. But if you are able to recognize that this blatant expression of imperialism is imperialism and nothing more, then there is only one way that you should vote tonight. But again, let's forget for a moment that about whether invading another state and fighting for democracy or individual liberty is justifiable and these questions. Let's indulge the make-believe of the proposition and imagine that there is nothing wrong with invasion and imperialism. Why do we get to do it? What makes us, in the West, so qualified to masquerade as the world's police? Are we really the righteous guardians of democracy, liberty, and the rule of law here in the United Kingdom or the United States? Now, as Maya told you earlier, I was a substitute for this debate, and I have to confess that I slightly ran out of time when writing this, so I hope you'll forgive me for reverting to the words of Sacha Baron Cohen in The Dictator. I want you to imagine if America was a dictatorship. You could let 1% of the people have all the nation's wealth. You could help your rich friends get richer by cutting their taxes, by bailing them out when they gamble and lose. You could ignore the needs of the poor for healthcare and education. Your media would appear free, but would secretly be controlled by one person. You could wiretap phones. You could torture foreign prisoners. You could have rigged elections. You could lie about why you go to war. You could use the media to scare people into supporting policies that are actually against their interests. I'm sure the Americans in the room probably can't relate. Imagine. Anyway, on a more serious note, when our own nations are laden with issues that include mass socioeconomic inequality, a crisis of distrust in political systems, fighting for loose, selective ideas of democracy abroad not only fails to make meaningful difference in those countries that we invade, but also neglects domestic issues, which then have negative repercussions that contribute to internal unrest and instability. We breed and create instability, chaos, and violence in a nation that never asked for it, and we exacerbate issues at home as well. To conclude then, I would like to remind the House of precisely what this motion entails. To fight for democracy, individual liberty, and rule of law abroad. We fight for democracy by forcing a system of governance that is declared superior upon a population that has not asked for it and that does not want it. We fight for individual liberty by silencing these people and hurling them into a program of rebuilding that is financially crippling, breeds irresolvable social instability, and paves the way for exploitative leaders to come to power. And we fight for the rule of law by reducing what once could have been a proud nation with a rich culture and history to a defeated pile of rubble and dust, its legal system shattered and justice in chaos. So if you are on the side of oppression, exploitation, and destruction, then vote with the proposition. But if you are truly on the side of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law, then you must vote with the opposition tonight. Thank you.